She caught me staring, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew about boundaries didn't matter anymore. Flushed-face fire. I first noticed her on a quiet Saturday afternoon. My friend had invited me over to help with some weekend chores. Nothing special, just a casual day that I thought would be boring. But then she appeared, his mom, moving through the house with a calm, effortless grace that seemed to fill the room without trying. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. There was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence tempered by warmth, that drew my attention without permission. She was arranging flowers in the kitchen, her hands nimble and deliberate as they shifted the petals just so. I watched, almost hypnotized, as sunlight caught the subtle highlights in her hair. The soft fragrance of her perfume, a gentle, comforting scent, floral but not overpowering, lingered in the air and seemed to follow me even as I tried to focus on unloading the groceries. Every glance at her sent a strange sort of jolt through me, the kind of awareness I wasn't prepared to feel. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just noticing a beautiful woman. But it wasn't just beauty, it was the way she smiled when my friend cracked a joke, the way her eyes softened when she listened. There was an ease to her presence, a quiet authority, yet a subtle vulnerability I couldn't ignore. I found myself stealing glances, watching the gentle curve of her neck as she leaned to pick up a vase, the faint rhythm of her breathing, the way her lips curved in a soft smile that seemed meant for the world, but somehow, for a moment, felt directed at me. I tried to focus on helping, arranging the groceries, pretending I hadn't noticed how the sunlight glinted off her necklace or how the fabric of her sweater seemed to fall perfectly along her shoulders. But every time I looked, there was something new to notice, a laugh, a gesture, a softness in her tone when she spoke to me. My chest tightened in a way that confused me. This was wrong, wasn't it? She was my friend's mom. Yet I couldn't help the curiosity that had taken root, a quiet, insistent tug at the corners of my mind. Even when she walked past me, brushing against my arm lightly as she reached for something on the counter, I felt an unexpected warmth spread through my body. My heart raced, but it was more than just the shock of touch. It was the subtle intimacy of proximity, the way she didn't pull away, as if that brief contact were as natural to her as breathing. I caught the faintest sparkle in her eyes as she glanced at me, a glimmer that I couldn't interpret, and it left me dizzy with anticipation and confusion. By the time I left that day, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just admiration or curiosity, it was awareness. Awareness of the pull she had on me, the magnetic combination of confidence and vulnerability, the warmth and grace I hadn't expected. And deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. Something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about boundaries, desire, and restraint. It was a day like any other, or at least I thought it would be. I was helping my friend with some errands, carrying a few bags of groceries from the car into the house. She appeared in the doorway, casually leaning against the frame, a small smile playing at her lips. The air seemed to shift the moment she was there. I tried to act natural, pretending to focus on the bags, but my eyes betrayed me, drawn to her as if by some invisible thread. Then it happened, a moment so ordinary that no one else would have noticed, but for me, it felt monumental. I reached for a bag, just as she leaned in to pass me a small package. Our hands brushed, a fleeting contact, barely a second, but the sensation lingered like fire running along my skin. Her hand was warm, soft, and deliberate, almost teasing in its light pressure. I felt my pulse spike and my breath catch, a strange heat pooling in my chest. She didn't flinch. Her gaze met mine, calm yet curious, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow down to that shared space. I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes deepen slightly as she smiled, subtle but knowing, as if she sensed the effect she had on me. There was no judgment in her look, only the quiet awareness of connection. And in that awareness, my mind raced. exhilaration, guilt, fascination, all tangled together in a way I couldn't untangle. As we straightened up, our shoulders brushed accidentally, and the warmth of her presence seemed to linger long after she moved away. I caught the faintest scent of her perfume again, soft and floral, wrapping around my senses. It was intoxicating, but also grounding, strangely comforting even as it stirred emotions I wasn't ready to face. I noticed the way her hair fell slightly over her shoulder, catching the sunlight and giving it an almost ethereal glow. I felt suddenly exposed, acutely aware of every detail. The way her fingers lingered on the package, the curve of her wrist, the quiet steadiness in her movements. I tried to focus on my task, to keep my composure, but the accidental closeness left an imprint on my thoughts. Every casual brush, every shared glance, carried a tension I couldn't explain. It was magnetic, pulling me in despite all the boundaries I knew I had to respect. And yet, there was a softness there too, a gentle reassurance in the way she interacted that made it almost unbearable. The combination of thrill and comfort, danger and warmth. Later, when I replayed the moment in my mind, I realized that it had left me unsettled in the best possible way. The touch had been brief, almost accidental, but opened a door I didn't know existed, a door to curiosity, desire, and a connection that felt dangerous yet impossible to ignore. I wasn't ready for what it meant, for the pull I felt toward her, but I knew with quiet certainty that I wouldn't be able to stop noticing her, wondering about her, and feeling the subtle electricity whenever our paths crossed. That brief, accidental touch was more than physical. It was the start of something unspoken, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us could ignore. And for the first time, I understood that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the heaviest weight. I never expected her to notice. Not like that. Not the way she did. We were sitting in the living room, my friend distracted by a video game, when she glanced up at me with a look that stopped me cold. It wasn't anger or judgment. It was sharper than that, a knowing, piercing awareness that made my stomach twist in a mixture of dread and something else I couldn't name. "You've been staring again, haven't you?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with teasing, as if she'd been keeping score in her mind for a while. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened my mouth, trying to think of something clever or innocent, but the words froze halfway out. I could feel my ears warming, my palms growing slightly clammy. I wanted to look anywhere but at her, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away from the subtle curve of her smile, the way her gaze lingered on me, soft but penetrating. It was the first time I realized that she knew, that she saw through the awkward, fumbling facade I'd been maintaining. And worse, or perhaps more thrilling, she wasn't angry. She was amused, curious, and maybe even a little indulgent. Her confidence filled the space around her, a quiet force that made me aware of my own hesitations, my own insecurities. The room felt warmer all of a sudden, as if the air itself had thickened with tension. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, but all of it seemed distant, background to the heat pooling in my chest. I noticed every small detail, the tilt of her head, the way her hair fell softly over one shoulder, the way her eyes crinkled slightly as she waited for my response. It was maddening. I didn't mean, I stammered, but she cut me off with a soft laugh that made my heart skip again. It wasn't mocking, it was warm, intimate, almost like she was letting me off the hook while also letting me know exactly how caught I was. The sound lingered in my ears long after she'd stopped speaking, a reminder of how dangerously aware I was of her presence. Her eyes softened for just a moment, revealing something underneath the teasing, a hint of vulnerability, of honesty. I realized then that she wasn't just calling me out for fun. There was a quiet challenge in her gaze, a subtle invitation to meet her on a level I hadn't yet dared approach. I could feel the pulse of my own hesitation, the silent acknowledgement of a connection I hadn't dared admit to myself. I wanted to look away, to retreat, to pretend nothing had happened, but my curiosity held me rooted in place. And in that pause, in the shared awareness between us, something shifted. The playful accusation, the soft laughter, the lingering eye contact. It was all charged with a tension I couldn't ignore. It left me exposed, vulnerable, and acutely alive. By the time the moment passed, I was left trembling on the inside, my thoughts a chaotic mess of desire, guilt, and fascination. She had called me out, yes, but in doing so, she had opened a door I couldn't close, a door to curiosity, attraction, and a subtle connection that neither of us could pretend didn't exist. And I knew, deep down, that my life had just changed in ways I wasn't ready to face. The house felt quieter that evening, the kind of quiet that invites thoughts you usually try to push away. I found myself lingering in the kitchen, pretending to grab a snack while really hoping she might stay nearby. And she did. She leaned casually against the counter, her presence calm, but somehow magnetic. There was no teasing this time, no pointed observation, just her warmth filling the space around her, drawing me in without a word. We started talking, at first about nothing important. The weather, errands, small stories from her day. But beneath the mundane conversation, there was a current, subtle and unspoken, pulling at both of us. Every time I laughed, I felt the brush of her eyes on me, warm and knowing. Every time she spoke, I noticed the gentle cadence of her voice, the soft rise and fall that made my chest tighten in ways I didn't expect. At some point, the conversation shifted. Maybe it was the quiet of the evening, maybe it was the comfort of a shared space, but suddenly we were talking about life, the things we worried about, the little regrets, the small victories no one else noticed. She listened with genuine attention, leaning slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing against mine. That simple contact sent a jolt of warmth through me. I felt the subtle weight of her presence, steady and reassuring, as though she was silently saying, I see you. You matter. I noticed her hands, delicate but strong, folding over each other as she spoke. The way she gestured, even in small motions, carried a softness that made me ache with a strange longing I didn't fully understand. And her eyes, always her eyes, held a depth I wasn't prepared for, a quiet curiosity, a hint of something unspoken that made me feel both exposed and safe at the same time. At one point, our hands brushed lightly while reaching for the same cup of coffee. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Instead, the contact lingered just long enough to make my heart race, sending an unexpected thrill through me. I caught the faintest smile tugging at her lips, subtle and almost shy, and it left me dizzy with awareness. It wasn't bold, wasn't reckless, just a quiet acknowledgement of the tension building between us. The conversation slowed, and we found ourselves sitting closer than we had before. The air felt charged, not with urgency, but with possibility. I realized I could feel her warmth radiating through the small space between us. Her hair brushed slightly against my arm, a soft, fleeting contact that made my pulse spike. I wanted to ask questions to clarify, to name what was happening, but there was a sacredness in the silence, a fragile beauty in simply being near her. By the end of the evening, I walked away with a mind full of thoughts I couldn't yet untangle. That one quiet conversation, full of small gestures and lingering glances, had shifted something inside me. I realized that it wasn't just curiosity or fleeting admiration anymore. There was connection here, subtle but undeniable, a shared awareness of something neither of us could yet fully claim. And it terrified me in the most thrilling way imaginable. It was late afternoon when the moment came. The first time her presence felt more than just magnetic, when it became tangible, something I could almost reach out and touch without fear. My friend had stepped out for a bit, leaving me alone with her in the living room. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows, painting everything in warm golden hues. Even the faint scent of her perfume seemed more noticeable now, wrapping around me like a gentle whisper. We had been talking about mundane things, books she liked, movies we both remembered fondly. But the conversation had softened, slowed down, as though time itself was leaning toward us. At one point, I tripped over a small rug, and she reached out instinctively, steadying me with her hand on my forearm. It was brief, subtle, but the warmth of her touch lingered, traveling up my arm and straight to my chest. I could feel her strength, quiet yet deliberate, and it made my pulse quicken in ways I couldn't control. She gave me a small, knowing smile, the kind that made me feel seen, like she understood the storm of thoughts I hadn't yet admitted to myself. "Careful," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to hum through the room. I nodded, but my focus had already drifted to the sensation of her hand against mine, the weight of it, the heat, the gentle firmness. It was the kind of touch that lingered in memory, even after it had passed. Minutes later, as we continued talking, I realized I had unconsciously inched closer. She noticed, of course, and didn't move away. Her eyes met mine, steady, warm, curious, and in that silent exchange, something shifted. She leaned just slightly toward me, the subtle brush of her hair against my arm sending a shiver down my spine. The air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement, but not so much that it felt dangerous. Instead, it felt right, like the world had compressed around us, leaving only this quiet, intimate space. Then came a moment I had imagined, but never expected. She reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. Her fingers lingered against my skin, soft and deliberate. I felt my heartbeat accelerate in a way that made me lightheaded. I looked at her, expecting perhaps a laugh or a teasing comment, but instead, she just gave me that quiet, gentle smile that seemed to say, "It's okay to feel this, even if we can't name it yet." Before I could respond, she shifted slightly closer and, without a word, gave me a brief, comforting hug. Her arms slipped around my shoulders, steady and reassuring. I froze for a moment, caught between awe and disbelief, and then felt the calm rhythm of her heartbeat pressed against me, steady and grounding. It wasn't romantic in the obvious sense. It was safe, yet intimate, carrying all the weight of what had been building between us. When she pulled back, just enough to let our eyes meet, I felt a rush of warmth flood me, leaving a lingering trace of her presence on my skin. That small act, so simple and yet so profound, shifted everything. I realized that the unspoken tension between us was no longer just curiosity. It was a tangible, breathing connection, one I could feel in every nerve ending, every subtle glance, every shared silence. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying with it the soft scent of jasmine from the garden just outside the window. We were sitting on the porch, the quiet hum of the neighborhood around us, the world reduced to the small circle of space we shared. For the first time, there was no pretense, no distractions, just the two of us, lingering in the aftermath of moments we hadn't named yet, moments that had stretched into something deeper. I felt the weight of my own thoughts pressing in, the awareness of everything I'd felt since that first accidental glance, that first brush of hands. I could see it mirrored in her eyes, subtle but unmistakable. Curiosity, hesitation, recognition. She wasn't just a presence anymore. She was a force I had to reckon with, a quiet gravity that drew me closer even when reason told me to step back. "You've been avoiding the truth, haven't you?" she said softly, almost a whisper, her gaze steady on mine. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was intimate, like she was inviting me into a secret I didn't yet fully understand. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I don't know what you mean," I said, though my voice betrayed me. My fingers itched to reach out, to brush against her hand, to close the tiny distance between us, but I stayed frozen. She laughed softly, a low, gentle sound that made my chest ache. "Don't lie to me," she said, leaning slightly forward. "I see it every time you look at me, and I can't pretend I don't notice it either." There was a pause, and in that silence, my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rise and fall of her breath, the way her hair caught the dim light of the porch lamp. Every detail anchored me to the moment, every small gesture loaded with meaning I could no longer ignore. I finally exhaled, the tension breaking in a rush of words I hadn't expected to say. I think about you," I admitted quietly, almost ashamed of the intensity behind it. "I try not to, but I do, and I don't know what to do about it." Her eyes softened, a flicker of something vulnerable passing through them, and for a second, I felt the world shrink to just us. "I've noticed," she said, almost tenderly, "and I won't lie, I feel it too." Her hand hovered near mine, close enough to notice the heat of her skin, close enough to tremble at the thought of touch. But she didn't close the distance completely. There was still restraint, a delicate balance between acknowledgement and respect. We sat like that for a long moment, words unnecessary, the tension between us no longer awkward but alive. It was the first time we had admitted to our feelings, the first time the unspoken had become tangible, even if only in the quiet corners of our conversation. The air between us hummed with possibility, charged with both danger and safety, thrill and comfort. By the end of the evening, I knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. We had confronted the feelings we had tried to ignore, and in doing so, we had opened a door neither of us could close. And even though the world outside remained unchanged, within that small circle of porch light and jasmine, everything had shifted forever. The days after our conversation felt lighter, yet charged with a quiet anticipation I couldn't shake. Every time I visited, there was a subtle shift in the air between us, a glance that lingered just a second too long, a brush of hands that seemed almost accidental but somehow deliberate, a smile that reached her eyes and made my chest tighten with warmth. The tension that had once been confusing had softened into something tender, something I could finally breathe in without panic. One evening, my friend was out again, leaving us alone in the living room. The soft glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the walls, turning the familiar room into a quiet haven. She was sitting on the couch, legs tucked under her, and I hesitated before taking a seat nearby. The space between us felt intimate, charged, yet safe, a delicate balance neither of us wanted to disrupt, but both of us secretly craved. We talked quietly, our conversation meandering like it always did, drifting from books to music to small personal anecdotes we hadn't shared before. Every word she spoke carried warmth, a subtle cadence that wrapped around me like a blanket. I noticed the way her eyes softened when she laughed, the way her fingers unconsciously traced patterns on the fabric of the couch, and I felt a magnetic pull toward her that went beyond mere admiration. At some point, she shifted closer, a gentle movement that brought our shoulders almost in contact. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, a comforting yet exhilarating presence. Then, as if guided by instinct, she reached out and rested her hand lightly on mine. It was simple, tender, and completely electrifying. Her skin was warm, reassuring, and the touch spoke volumes: connection, understanding, and a shared acknowledgement of feelings that words could not capture. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let myself lean in just slightly, drawn by the quiet intimacy that had been building for weeks. She responded naturally, her hand giving a small, reassuring squeeze, and I felt a rush of emotion I couldn't name. Relief, joy, longing, and comfort all at once. The world outside ceased to exist for that moment. There was only the steady warmth of her presence, the rhythm of her heartbeat, and the knowledge that this connection, subtle as it was real. Then, in a gesture that felt both safe and deeply personal, she gave me a brief hug. Her arms slipped around my shoulders, her cheek brushing against mine ever so lightly. I could feel the steady pulse of her heartbeat against me, the softness of her breath, the gentle strength in the way she held me. It was an intimacy without urgency, a tenderness that spoke of trust, of understanding, of a bond that had grown quietly but fiercely. When she pulled back, our eyes met, and there was a quiet smile that said everything we hadn't yet spoken aloud. I felt a warmth lingering in my chest, a sense of completion, of connection, of belonging. The attraction, the tension, the curiosity, all of it had been acknowledged, nurtured, and transformed into something beautifully real and enduring. As I left that night, the soft scent of her perfume still clinging to me, I realized that nothing about our relationship needed to be rushed. We had crossed boundaries in ways that mattered without breaking them, building a connection rooted in trust, tenderness, and deep emotional intimacy. And in that quiet, safe, slow-burn way, we had found something unforgettable, a love that didn't need to shout, but simply existed, steady and true, in every glance, every touch, and every unspoken word.